Assal, as you saw in the promo, is a non-resident fellow of the Arab Center in Washington, D.C., and the author of The State of Resistance: Politics, Culture, and Identity in Modern Iran. Sana is a media critic and on-camera correspondent. She was formerly former host and senior producer at Al Jazeera and a media and cultural critic. So um, I think we need to spotlight them. I'm going to add that. So Sana and Assal, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar.
Thank you so much for having us.
Same. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So Sana's going to get us started with an overview, and then we'll turn it over to Assal to talk to us also about media bias. So I'm going to let you go, Sana.
Hello, everyone. So I have about 10-15 minutes to basically break down 2 years of media coverage of the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, which is, of course, ongoing. And a little bit more, just a little bit more context about myself. So as it was mentioned in my introduction, I was an Al Jazeera journalist for 10 years, on-camera correspondent, and I focused specifically in the last 4 years on media criticism, and specifically looking at how the U.S. news media itself covers some of the most important stories, both in the domestic frame and the international frame. And in the last 2 years before I left Al Jazeera, I was focusing specifically on the genocide in Gaza, and I was the host of two shows. One was called Backspace, which was a media critique series, which was really going in depth into like a lot of media coverage, ranging from Joe Biden's own allegiance to the state of Israel and his personal Zionism, to even the media coverage of anti-Semitism on college campuses, and the kind of function of all of that in the grander media complicity in building the case for the genocide of Palestinians and repressing any protest and dissent of it in the United States. And then I had another series called The Occupation Style Guide, which specifically which was created for and during the genocide itself. And it was looking at the language that newsrooms use and how we can do better. So looking at terms like evacuations, right? Ethnic cleansing, so on and so forth. I mean, there was no shortage of content to work with when it comes to what coverage has looked like of the U.S.-backed Israeli genocide of the Palestinians over the last and now over 2 years. And I think there's so many places that are important to start with. Like, of course, the way that the situation on the ground did not begin in October of 2023, did not begin on October 7th, 2023. The media narratives on Palestinians do not begin in October of 2023, right? These are narratives that have existed for decades, not just simply about Palestinians, but about Arabs and Muslims and others in the region and beyond as well. But I do want us, though, of course, to focus per the purpose of this conversation today, this workshop today, on the last 2 years, and specifically what we see as not necessarily unique, but really, I would say, from especially as a journalist, what I found the most morally egregious patterns of coverage of this genocide, of what the media was calling just a war on Gaza or in Gaza, the war against Hamas, all these different framings of it. I think what's really critical to understand about the coverage over the last 2 years is that the victims of this war, of this genocide, have consistently been made into unreliable, quote unquote, right? I'm not saying this is what's true, but it's what they've been manufactured into, unreliable narrators. And so we've been told since October 7th in particular, but not exclusively since then, that we need to understand Palestinians as unreliable witnesses to their own occupation, to their own displacement, to their own murders, to their own the slaughter that is happening of their people. It's unreliable narrators, untrustworthy narrators, untrustworthy witnesses to their own conditions. And that we must always privilege the narrative of the Israelis. And this, once you understand this as kind of the foundation of any and all coverage when it comes to the Israeli occupation of Palestine, when it comes to Israel itself, when it comes to Palestine, to Gaza, to the West Bank, once you understand this, it becomes very easy to understand why the coverage has looked like what it's looked like over the last 2 years. And so what we find is that the coverage since October 2023 has presented that even when Palestinians are shown to us in their most uh, the images that are shown are the most tragic images that we can imagine, right? Like the emaciated children, footage of desperate Palestinians seeking shelter, stories about how they're being, children are being sniped. And that if we're getting these stories, we still find again and again that it is the Israeli narrative that is still being privileged. And that looks like, for instance, always referencing the quote unquote horrific events of October 7th, right? That is like a mainstay quote that you will hear again and again in any and all coverage of even the devastation that Palestinians have faced as a people or as even individuals. We find that again and again, whatever violence that has been inflicted on Palestinians, even though it is presented to us as unfortunate, at best, unfortunate or devastating, or oh, like the pathetic case of the Palestinians who are just caught in the middle of this, right? It's also presented as though they're caught in the middle of it, as opposed to being the targets of a sustained military genocidal campaign by a heavily armed ethno-nationalist state backed by the biggest and most well-funded military in the world, right? Like we're supposed to be, they're just caught in the middle of it instead of being direct targets of it. That even that violence, even when we are supposed to empathize, sympathize with the Palestinians, they're still like that violence is still justified. And the first 3 months of the coverage of the genocide, I believe, were the most important of the last 2 years, because everything that we've seen since then was created on the foundation of those first 3 months. And specifically, so there's a lot to talk about, so I'm trying to make sure I get a little bit of everything in here. And of course, we can get more into it in the Q&A session. So let's start with the very first thing, which is the foundational narrative. As I mentioned, the kind of foundational trope is like that Palestinians themselves are presented as unreliable narrators and as untrustworthy witnesses to their own conditions and to their own suffering, to the violence that they're experiencing. So that's kind of like the base level, the foundation of all of this. Above that, what we find is that the October 7th narrative itself is what becomes necessary to lock in. And so the US news media, which is voluntarily enmeshed with, the interests of the US foreign policy, enmeshed with the US state itself, enmeshed with the foreign policy interests of course, the United States. And that's not unique to even just Israel. We find this like again and again in other examples as well. When it comes to covering foreign policy or issues of foreign policy, the US news media will always align itself, with maybe some exceptions here and there, but almost always align itself with the interests of the US government, regardless of who's in power, right? Whether it's a Republican president or a Democratic president, we'll find that there is an alignment still. Maybe they'll differ on domestic, but when it comes to foreign, they will always tend to align with those interests. And we can also see that currently with the coverage or the lack of coverage even around the fact that the United States is bombing Venezuela and the Caribbean. And no one's like, should we be doing this? Why are we doing this? And so it becomes important to lock in the October 7th narrative. Now, remember, when it comes to October 7th, there was no investigation independent investigation that happened to the complete events of that day. We still don't know how many people were, and these are important questions as a journalist, right? This is not even simply coming from a standpoint of an activist, but from a purely journalistic standpoint. These are fundamental questions that need to be asked, right? Especially if a country is going to embark on a grand scale military campaign, which of course, as we've seen has the purpose being a genocide. it becomes incumbent on journalists to ask those questions, as opposed, why did the Israeli military take as long as it did to respond? How many Israelis were killed, Israeli civilians and soldiers were killed by the Israelis themselves? We know that thus far, according to Israeli press and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant have admitted that at least 25 Israelis were killed by the Israelis themselves, and that's considered still a very, very low number. Now, this is all very, very fundamental to, again, what is then used later to justify what Israel is going to do. We find also on the October 7th narrative about 40 beheaded babies, right? Immediately is thrown out there about mass rapes. Now, a lot of people hear about, mass rapes done by Palestinian fighters of Israeli women. The story kind of breaks in like late November, December, but it actually started like kind of being put in Hebrew press and then a little bit into English press in October itself. But we didn't really pick up until much later. So the seed, and of course the very famous Netanyahu calling Hamas is ISIS, that horrible kind of visual campaign that they created. And so the seeds then of what the narrative will be, the foundational narrative for this genocide that was adopted without any question by the US news media is this. It is not that what happened, why it happened, what happened on October 7th, why it happened, why did Palestinian fighters do this, what was the result, what were the conditions that Palestinians were living in prior to October 7th in Gaza in particular? What were those conditions like? The fact that on October 6th, there was a pogrom in the West Bank by Israeli settlers that led to the killing of a 17-year-old Palestinian child, right? They were, who became the 234th, I believe, Palestinian to be killed in 2023, a number which rose to almost 10,000 just 10 days later because of the Israeli genocide that began on October 7th. So we have that happen. Then what we have after we've cemented the narrative October 7th without any investigation, without any questioning, with again, Palestinians are presented to us unreliable, untrustworthy, and just bloodthirsty, right? Arabs, Muslims, scary. We then have slowly the building up to the justification of the annihilation, the eradication of the Palestinian healthcare system. And this is so, so, so important to the entire genocide. Because what is a hospital? What is healthcare itself? It is the foundation of life. It is where a hospital is where life can begin, and oftentimes where it begins and oftentimes where it ends. It is where there are pathways and mechanisms created in order to sustain life further. You have an injury, you have a disease, you have an ailment of any kind. Most people who have the means and ability will go to a hospital, right? So healthcare, and especially in Gaza, was so, so critical. And the Israelis had a history of targeting Palestinian healthcare in Gaza for years. Like, for instance, in 2008, 2009, during Operation Cast Lead, the Israelis focused on bombing Shifa Hospital, which is something they always have wanted to do, because Shifa was considered like the heart of Palestinian healthcare. So on October 17th, 2023, what happens? We find the bombing of the Al Ahli Arab Hospital, which immediately, right, where every reporting is like it was the Israelis who did this, because who else is bombing Gaza? But within hours, the Israelis say, actually, no, it wasn't us. This was actually a misfired rocket from PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And immediately the conversation doesn't become like, hey, there's a good possibility that the Israelis just bombed a hospital. This needs to be condemned. This cannot be allowed. Instead of it being that, and I believe at the time it was Palestinians also said that there were anywhere from, I think, 300 to 500 Palestinians who were killed and injured in that strike. And the story became less about the fact that this happened, and instead the story became. I want to make sure I'm good for time, so I'll wrap it up in a 2-3 minutes. But the story instead became about, again, the trustworthiness of Palestinians. So around this time, we see President Joe Biden get on camera, and this is after Joe Biden has already said that he saw photos of 40 beheaded babies, which the White House had to come out twice and say, no, he did not. He did not see any of these photos, but he said it twice, that he had seen photos of these beheaded babies, that he had personally been shown them by also Netanyahu. But so Joe Biden comes out and he says in a press conference that he has no notion, when he's asked about this, that he has no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth. So you have the president of the United States reiterating what I mentioned is the foundation of what the coverage has looked like, again, over the last 2 years, which is that Palestinians are unreliable narrators of their own conditions, of their own, of what they experience, and they're untrustworthy witnesses to their own deaths, to their own violence, or to the violence that they're experiencing. So this happens, and all of a sudden, we also saw like the Pentagon spokesperson justify the targeting of hospitals because, oh, well, if Hamas is hiding in them, fight it, which again, under international law, these are not legitimate targets. But Dr. Hassan Abu Sitta, who is a Palestinian British doctor who was in Gaza and then later was able to leave, says very poignantly that the war began on October 7th, but the genocide began on October 17th, specifically because when we allowed for one Palestinian hospital to be bombed like that, and then to allow Israel to get away with it in the way that it did, we allowed for the destruction of the Palestinian healthcare system. And what we've seen is 2 years of the complete devastation of the Palestinian healthcare system, which means that if the bombs don't kill you, then maybe starvation and malnutrition will, maybe sepsis from your wounds will, right? Maybe lack of healthcare, maternal healthcare, child healthcare, all these things. What it does is the destruction of the healthcare system, which there is very little coverage of this. We've had numerous doctors from the United States and elsewhere in the world, but especially in the United States for our context, have gone to Gaza and they have told us what they've witnessed, including the fact that not only the destruction of the healthcare system, but also the fact that injured, maimed Palestinians leaving hospitals or within hospitals have been targeted. The fact that children, of course, have been sniped in the head again and again and again. And doctors have said this, and there is very little coverage of this because all of this, talking about the Israeli violence, which is again US backed, disrupts a narrative that has been sustained in this country for decades, but especially the last 30 years, about what Obama called the sacrosanct relationship between the United States and Israel. And there you will find sometimes there are, positive stories, right? You probably like, oh, I saw this great story on NPR where, a Palestinian child and who was an amputee was profiled, and you learn about the devastating experience of that child. But the thing is that these stories are not only exceptions oftentimes, but also still framed as Palestinians are just pathetic victims caught in a war, as opposed to them being specifically targeted by a state whose officials, whose entire media industry, news industry, and up until relatively recently, over 80 to 90% of its citizenry believes that Palestinians should be eradicated, right? So I'm going to leave it at that. I hope that was, I think it's been over 10 minutes, but I hope that was sufficient and about like the kind of the core narratives that really underlie what is the dehumanization of Palestinians within our news industry.
That was superb. Thank you so much, Sana. I just wanted to add, because you spoke a lot about healthcare, that the media kept calling it, when the Gaza Ministry of Health was keeping track of the numbers, they said the Hamas-led, go ahead.
I was going to say, thank you so much for bringing that up because that was the point I wanted to make. So after the bombing of the Al Ahli Arab Hospital, that's when before that, it was the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. That's how it's being referred to. And traditionally, it has always been seen as extremely reliable, in fact, conservative in its numbers of how many Palestinians have been killed. Everyone has relied, including the State Department, as we learned, the State Department relies on the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza for the numbers of Palestinians that have been killed. And even they were having internal conversations that they believed early on that the numbers were too low. However, after October 17th, there was a former Reuters bureau chief, his name is escaping me, but he was the one who said, hey, we should be actually he's former, he wasn't with Reuters anymore, but he wrote an article or something of that sort about, or he wrote a thread on what was then Twitter about how we need to use the Hamas run, that this is more accurate. And what we see then is the adoption of the Hamas run Ministry of Health, which is again actually a core part of justifying the targeting and killing, the targeting of the healthcare infrastructure, but also the targeting and killing and abduction of healthcare workers. As we know from everyone from Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who was kidnapped, tortured, raped to death, and in an Israeli torture program as Stay Timan, and of course the abduction of Dr. Hussam
Abu Sofia.
Abu Sofia, right? Like all of these
Yeah.
things have been justified because everything is Hamas. Everything is Hamas, and so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Right. So just so you'll know, we've actually interviewed 3 or 4 of the doctors, American doctors and surgeons who went to Gaza, like Dr. Feroz Sidwa, Dr. Mark Thompson. There was 1 or 2 others. So we've heard from them. And as you said, we don't hear those reports in mainstream media. They're not covering that. And some organization is giving an award of courage to Dr. Abu Sofia. I can't remember what organization, but that just kind of warmed my heart. So thank you so much, Sana. We're going to come back to you later. I'm going to move over to Assal. There she is. And I think you might be sharing your screen.
Yes.
So welcome, Assal Rad. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm always very, very happy to share this space with Sana because she's obviously, as everything you all heard, it's an excellent overview. And so I don't want to repeat and say the same thing. What I will do is discuss, and I'll have some slides to share in a moment. What I've done is work a lot on the sort of visual representations of the type of coverage that you just heard about. What does this actually look like? And specifically, I focused a lot on headlines and the way that the public passively consumes information. Why is that significant? We got an idea of what were the events on the ground, what was happening, what was the coverage like, the role of the US government and other Western governments in facilitating and being complicit in the Gaza genocide. But what do we talk about when we're talking about the way that the media narrative impacts how people actually think? And I'll give you one example of what that means. When you look at public perceptions, I mean, if we're sitting in this room right now, we likely have a better idea of the reality on the ground and even the history of the Palestinian issue and Palestinian liberation, because we're sitting in this room and there are people who are interested. But when you look at the general public, not everybody is following events as closely. So how are people forming their public opinions? They're doing so oftentimes passively through consuming basic media. You go on, Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter X, and you see posts. You don't necessarily read the entire article. You don't search for articles if there are no posts, if there are no push notifications, if there are no headlines that you're seeing written or coverage on these channels. So the reason I focus on headlines is because this is the kind of media that this is the thing that frames the story. So if you look at a poll amongst Americans in actually late winter so we're looking at late February, early March of 2024, when the Palestinian death toll, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, which is an undercount because they don't have the tools and capacity these are identified names and bodies. This is not considering the thousands of people that are still missing or were missing at the time when we had this number. But this is when the 30,000 death toll threshold had been passed, right? Just an enormous death toll already in the first few months of the genocide. And more than half of Americans could not answer correctly whether or not more Palestinians or Israelis had been killed at this point, even though the numbers are astronomically different. And of course, after October 7th, deaths on the Israeli military forces within Gaza, and quite limited, right? So the fact on the ground being so misrepresented that this is what public perceptions were is indicative of the way that this climate and this atmosphere of the media affects the way that people think. It's the same kind, and Sana talked about this a little bit when she said that this is not just about Israel-Palestine, but the wider way in which the region, the Muslim and Arab world is depicted. Just think back to the Iraq invasion of 2003 and how the media acted to manufacture consent there, when polling at that time showed that a majority of Americans believed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which it did not. Again, factually wrong. And that Iraq was involved in 9/11. Again, factually wrong. So when you look at that landscape, or I should say, keep that landscape in mind when we look at these slides. So I wanted to show you a little bit of the visual representation and what, in my view, correcting headlines and showing the difference of how just a few changes in the words or the language can change the entire framing of the story. So I'll try to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, it's not in slideshow mode, but we can.
That's
I
what
don't
I'm
know.
trying to, it should be slowly moving into slideshow mode, but I don't know why. Let's try it again. There we go. Is
There
it
you go.
slideshow
Yeah.
mode?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are a few, I wanted to actually have the examples of real headlines, and some of the patterns that we've already talked about, but that I want to show you visually. So one thing that we saw over and over again, and we still see, is a general lack of attribution to Israel. So you'll see headlines like this one from the BBC, where it says unimaginable destruction after strike on Gaza camp, without actually naming who carried out the airstrike, who is the aggressor, who is the attacker, who is the killer. Over and over again, the entity that is responsible for what is happening in Gaza, which is Israel, is not named in the headline. And that's not just about something as straightforward as an airstrike, but when you see headlines about starvation in Gaza, lack of medical supplies in Gaza, the destruction of hospitals, the destruction of homes, that is often painted as if it's a natural disaster rather than holding Israel directly responsible for that. Another pattern that we often see is not actually naming the victims, avoiding the word Palestinian, certainly avoiding the word Palestine to describe that Gaza or the West Bank or East Jerusalem or historic Palestine. And this is not by accident. This is very much to compartmentalize and divide these issues in order to erase. I mean, part of Israel's colonial project is the erasure of Palestine and Palestinians and Palestinian identity and culture. And so the removal of Palestinian from these stories is often very much intentional. And you see in this example, again, Gaza airstrike rather than an Israeli airstrike, hits as displaced as if to avoid saying, even in this case, sometimes they say Gazans. Even in this case, there's no Gazans, it's just displaced, avoiding the word Palestine or Palestinian. You get dehumanizing language. So the language itself is so important in understanding the words that are used and why they're used the way that they are. So the language of hostages versus prisoners. We hear all the time a hostage-prisoner exchange, which implies that, the connotation of these words are very important. A hostage is considered someone who's innocent. A prisoner is considered someone who's a criminal. Whereas you see in this example, CNN refers to a soldier, an Israeli soldier, is, quote, kidnapped from a military base, whereas a Palestinian doctor is detained from a hospital. So the Palestinian doctor is criminalized. The Israeli soldier is treated, even though it's an occupying military force, as an innocent hostage. You have avoidance of criminalizing language. So again, word selection that is meant to soften what Israel's actions actually are. Words like genocide, occupation, war crime, ethnic cleansing are avoided, and you see euphemisms like this one from the New York Times, a border presence, rather than calling it what it is, an occupation.
We're not seeing the presentation.
You also see language that normalizes war crimes. So, for instance, in this Reuters headline, it says the Israeli defense minister says no humanitarian aid to enter Gaza as a tool of pressure on Hamas. In basically, they're justifying collective punishment. The collective punishment of withholding humanitarian aid, which is obviously against international law, is justified in the way that it's framed by the headline and the way that the media is normalizing these crimes. This is one of my favorites. Israel says. So Israeli statements, we talked about this a little bit earlier, Sana talked about this a little bit earlier, are repeated as fact. They're stated as if they're fact. While Palestinian sources are consistently undermined, Israeli sources are treated, even though they're a state carrying out a genocide, are treated as if they are factual statements. And oftentimes, what you see from these headlines is Israel says. There's one example here, which is a statement that's ridiculous in its own right, right? The idea that after killing over 100 Palestinians, now Israel says the ceasefire is back on, as if that's not a ceasefire violation. It doesn't shatter the entire notion of a ceasefire. And by the way, dehumanizes Palestinians in the process by assuming that you can kill 100 Palestinians and it's still considered a ceasefire. But the fact that every headline starts with Israel says, which is not, at this point has been repeated over and over again, Israel says is not journalism. If we wanted to know what Israel says, we could just look at Israeli statements. The job of the media is to tell you the truth. On that note, there's the flip side, casting doubt on Palestinian sources. We just talked about this, the idea of Hamas run being used as language to constantly cast doubt on anything that's coming out of Gaza, specifically the death toll. In this BBC article, you see in the headline, Hamas-run ministry says is added to undermine the death toll. And yet in the article itself, it says that the United Nations has widely seen these numbers as reliable. The last two things I wanted to touch on, which I kind of mentioned, this idea of separating issues, terms like Gazans and West Bank residents, while Gazan is an appropriate sub-identity of Palestinians and their experiences are quite distinct. In this regard, it's used by the media oftentimes to separate these issues and undermine the larger cause of Palestinian liberation. And there's just underreporting, which is hard to show you because I can't show you the absence of something. But it's things like when Human Rights Watch comes out with a report that says Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, and that gets barely reported. Whereas if something is happening, if there's, the notion of Israeli victimhood, there's wall-to-wall coverage. But extremely important events, UN reports that come out and say Israel's actions constitute genocide are barely reported. Those are the topics I wanted to cover. These were just a couple of sort of examples of just how horrific the coverage has been. And examples of how, if you look at this one in the center, explosion, Gazans say was airstrike, leaves many casualties in dense neighborhood. That is barely English. These are the way that language is twisted oftentimes to avoid saying something that would make Israel look bad is so poorly formulated by people whose jobs are writing. So this is not because they're bad writers. It's because they're trying to obscure the facts. And when you try to do that, the language stops sounding coherent. And of course, other examples of that, well, like I mentioned, that 30,000 threshold back in February of 2024, New York Times headline reads, "Lives ended in Gaza." Another this is not how we talk. This is not how we write. We would never write that in a normal circumstance. But when you don't want to say Israel has killed 30,000 people thus far, you end up with a headline that says lives ended in Gaza. So I'll end there as the examples and the overview that we've had. And then hopefully we can get into more of this in the Q&A.
That was excellent, Assal. Thank you so much. That title, Explosions Gaza Say was airstrike, it was totally Orwellian language. So thank you for that. So folks, we have a treat for you. We're going to allow you to see if you can identify the bias, the incorrect framing of some headlines. We're actually going to put you into small groups so that you can talk with each other and see if you can decipher what's going on. We're giving you 6 headlines and we're asking you to discuss with your group what's misleading in this. How are they distorting the actual reality in the ways that Assal has just pointed out? So we're going to do some breakouts, and Cole is going to share Google Docs, a document to help you have that conversation. And then, by the way, we're going to come back and have a Q&A. So please don't leave. We hope you'll stay, and we'll have a Q&A with Sana and Assal. So I'm going to let Cole explain how this is going to work.
So we're going to give each breakout group a note paper like this with 6 headlines. And we would like you to discuss that headline together, identify the bias, and then decide as a group on alternative language for the headline, and then write it here. And so when you start your breakout group, we're going to have 9 or 10, wait a minute.
I can create them, Cole.
We're going to have 10 breakout groups, and they're already created them. And if you're in breakout group 7, I'm going to give you this folder, and you're going to find the document entitled Room 7 and open that document. That way, each breakout group will have its own document to write in, and you won't write on top of each other's work. Okay? So hope this works. Please, I'll go ahead and open the rooms now. And before I do, I'm going to put in the chat the place where these note papers are. I'm just fumbling around for my files here. Let's see.
We do hope you'll stay with us because it will be a rich conversation when we come back. I think Cole is setting it up for us.
Okay, so there's the place you put your notes. And now we will open the breakout.
Oh, Cole, I think I need to change some. Hold on a second. I need to change who that goes to, Cole. Can you do that? Can you do that again? Can you repost it?
I did repost it. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. Now to open the breakout rooms.
Are you all clear what you're doing?
No.
Where's the doc?
So
I see a folder called Notes and Headlines.
Cole put a link in the chat. You're going to click on
follow that link.
Yeah, breakout, and there's a bunch of documents. They all start media bias and the GA dot dot dot.
Right. So you got to find the one for your group number, but you won't know your group number until I open the group.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm going to do
My
that
room,
now.
and I clicked the view. Now I see room 1 through 9.
So where's the thing to open the breakouts? I'm fumbling here.
Do you want me to do it?
You can open them, yeah. Okay, there it goes. Okay, now you're being invited into your breakout room. You should have something at the bottom of this screen inviting you to join your room. Choose someone to moderate your group or to take notes for your group. And people who just joined the meeting may not be in a group, so I might have to put a couple of people in a group. Kathy and Max, if you are here, you are being asked to join a group. You should have something at the bottom of your screen that says join breakout room. Hi, Kim. If you can hear me, we are in breakouts, and there should be something at the bottom of your screen that says join breakout room. So if you click that, you'll go into a room with some other people. Breakouts will be over in about 2 minutes.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you, everyone. How did that go? Can I see a thumbs up, thumbs sideways? How did that go? Super. And did you all, I mean, in my group, that I think they can replace the New York Times editors. What do you think?
The
Yes.
same.
Right? Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go through them. Where is Assal? Assal, are you there somewhere? Cole, can you bring her back?
Yes, I'm asking her to restart her video so that we can bring her back. She has done that. Okay.
There she is. I see her. Oops.
I lost you. Wait a minute.
Okay, I'm the, oops,
What?
don't do that.
What's going
Don't do
on
that.
here? Okay, there we go. Huh.
All right, so now, Assal, let me just find this thing here. Hold on 1 second. All right, so let's take number one. Actually, I'm going to do it this way so I can see. Who has a revised headline for number one?
Group 3 did, Abby.
Tell me.
I can't read it. I mean, I can't remember what it was. So.
Who took notes who can tell us what you
I do.
Go ahead.
This is
I
group
mean,
four.
I
Okay,
wrote
sorry.
them. Okay.
Go ahead, Ken.
We said the Israeli war in Gaza is orphaning thousands of children, or the Israeli ethnic cleansing of Gaza is orphaning thousands of children.
Did you say is orphaning?
Yes.
Susan, what did you all say?
I would have to be able to look at group 3 notes by
I
memory.
see.
Maybe
Okay.
someone else in group 3 can.
Assal, what grade are you going to give them on this one?
It's good. I mean, it gets to the point. I think if I remember correctly, I think I did a correction on this one, and I tried to simplify them as much as possible. And I think for this one, I just said Israel is making thousands of orphans in Gaza.
Yep, Israel is.
That was very similar to what group 3 did.
Okay, excellent. Okay, number 2. Who has a revision for number 2? Call it out for us.
Israel is blocking aid to starving Gazans.
We said Israel is blocking aid to the Gazans that it's starving, to make it clear they weren't starving from some hurricane or disaster.
Oh, I love that. Say it again.
Israel is blocking aid to the Gazans that it is starving. We wanted to make sure that the agent of starvation was clear.
Lovely.
They weren't just starving.
Yeah. Assal, I think we're going to hire these people, right? To be the editors.
I wish you were all editors.
All right, let's go on to the next one. Who
Oh,
has one?
Abby, can I give ours from, I found my notes.
Susan,
for
give me
the number
give me,
2.
No, let's go on to number 3 in the interest of time. What do you have for number 3, Susan?
We didn't do that when we skipped it. I can go ahead with someone else.
Okay, and we'll come back to you for 4. Who has an answer? Someone who hasn't spoken yet for number 3.
We didn't get very far, but we got to this one. So we said, we're at number, what's 4, you said?
Number 3.
Israel keeps changing story about genocide numbers.
That's good.
Changing story of genocide numbers. I'm trying to see if that makes sense.
It said about genocide numbers.
Oh, partly mistaken. Okay. Anyone else have something for number 3?
Group 8, we had Israel admits lying about its murder of rescue workers in Gaza.
Great.
Did you say lying about its rescue? Is that what you said?
It's a murder
Murder.
of rescue workers in Gaza.
Super. Thank you, Isra. Okay, Susan, what do you have for number 4?
Starving Gazans eating green weeds.
Okay, that's good. Anyone else for number 4?
Again, we like the agency here. We said Gazans, starved by Israelis, resort to a leafy green. Really important to make sure the Israelis are seen as the agents of the starvation.
Very nice. Very, very astute. To a leafy green. Perfect. Okay.
Resort.
Did I say I wrote resort?
Yes, you got it. Yeah.
Okay, someone else, number 5 here, CBS News, from another group. What did you say for this one? Anyone else for number 5?
Group number 1 just simplified it to Israel kills dozens of Palestinians.
Can you hear me?
Hello, Palestinians. Assal, are we good with that one? Yep. Okay, Benjamin, did you have another one for number 5?
Sorry.
I was in group number 9, and our leader, I think, was transcribing the headlines we came up with.
Okay.
And I think that was the case of that one. We were just saying you don't need to mention Israel each time or something like that. I mean, but you would just simply say, let's see, let me see that dozens of Gazans killed as despite quote Israeli ceasefire or something like that. You don't need to say Israel says, like Allah was saying, you don't need to always say Israel says or Hamas says or something. Good journalism is simply describing that.
Yeah, they removed Israel Says, and they made Israel as the actor. Israel Killed. Assal, what were you going to add to this one?
That it should mention something about the like breaking the ceasefire, essentially.
Right.
Okay, excellent. Okay, just one more. Number 6, NPR. Which group has a John? Do you want to answer number 6?
Well, I just wanted to make a general observation and get a reaction from the. Is it worthwhile
So
making?
you hold on, John. We'll come back to you, John. We'll come back. Let's finish this first. So who has a revision to number 6?
Israel does not honor terms of ceasefire and kills 100 more Gazans.
Good.
Okay, we good with that?
That's good.
Super. Okay, I'm going to stop my share.
The only other thing I would note, not to fix them right now, but and I think it's being addressed in the chat as well, which I agree, and I tried to bring up this point in the slides, is again, Gazan is not incorrect in the sense that Gazan is a unique identity within Palestinian identity.
Palestinians.
But Palestinian, the reason why Palestinian is not used in the media and why they rely on Gazan is intentional. It's to separate it out. And so, in the same way that we are Americans, but we have subcultures and subregions and state identities and all of these different things, in the narrative of Palestine, that's why Palestine isn't used at all. No one says Palestine. So in order to say Palestine, you have to acknowledge that there is a state called Palestine, which the vast majority of the international community already recognizes, but also that there is a Palestinian nation and a Palestinian people. So Gazan is very often used to separate it out, and I think Sana already made that point in the chat.
Super. So I think they all deserve a round of applause. What a great job you all did. Bravo. Thanks for sticking with us. And so we want to do some Q&A. And John, are you still there? You wanted to ask a question.
Yes, I don't know that. I would just like to get the reaction of everyone to. Is the headline Israel or is the headline IDF? I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Israelis who have turned out in protest against what's going on in Gaza, and I'm not sure that Israeli is an accurate portrayal of.
Very good. So let's ask Assal or Sana to respond to that.
Can I say something here?
Can you hold on one second? I want to let them answer. Sana?
Yes, I'm happy to answer this question. I think it's a really important question that a lot of people oftentimes are also confused about because, we'll find that the term Israel is used again and again. So there are 2 points I want to make with regards to this. It's very common to refer, especially in journalism, to the name of the country versus just its military when you are discussing official actions taken by that country. It doesn't have to be in the military campaign. It can also be in the sense of like Israel or Canada agrees to a new flag for, whatever. It could be as like, obviously when we say Canada, we're not talking about every single Canadian is agreeing to this. It's an official decision. So there's, the term Israel is being used journalistically for that reason, which is one of the reasons why you won't see the word, again, in newsrooms, Palestine used because of the fact that officially, right, that there is no Palestinian state officially that does exist. And that's why they won't say Palestine does this, Palestine does that, et cetera. But the other point I do think is important to make, John, you mentioned that there are so many Israelis who've come out against, you said that they've come out against what's happening in Gaza. And I just want to issue a little bit of a correction on that. We've seen tens of thousands of Israelis absolutely flood flood the streets, but not against what's happening in Gaza. Instead, they've come out against specifically Netanyahu, but not for what he's doing in Gaza, but for that he's not doing enough. And also there's domestic politics with regards to his own corruption scandal that's been going on. Time and time again, Israeli surveys of Israeli populations has shown that the vast, and this is the thing I actually found pretty shocking myself, is that the vast majority of Israelis till now continue to support the genocide of the Palestinians, right? So for instance, in late 2024, the number of Israelis that supported the blocking of food aid into Gaza was over 60% of all Israelis. And that number goes even higher when we break Israelis down to like Israeli Jews versus, quote unquote, Israeli Arabs who are just Palestinians. Those numbers are even different, that we find, of course, that very jarring difference, expected difference between those two populations. And that we found that for over a year and a half of this genocide, more than 80%, I mean, at the beginning of the genocide, 96% of Israelis, and specifically, it was like 98% of Israeli Jews, believed that what was happening to the Palestinians was right, that they believed in the military campaign. I think the question that was posed to them, that this is enough or we need more, and they agreed to that. Since then, the number has gone down maybe to 80, maybe 75%, around there.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we find is that Israeli society as a whole is invested into this genocide, which we find in previous genocides as well, that it does take an entire society to enact a genocide.
Yeah, very good, Sana. Thank you. Let's see if we can get through these three people who are waiting. We'll go Marilyn, Samantha, and then Isam. Marilyn. If you can keep your questions short enough that we can get through them. Thank you.
Yeah, I have one quick comment and then a question. Another thing I've noticed in the press is that everything started October 7th, rather than the 100-year war on Palestine. But here's my question. I just want to check this because I've read that an occupied people, the Palestinians, under international law, have the right to resist by any means necessary, and an occupier, in other words, Israel, has no right to self-defense. And they're constantly talking about Israel's right to self-defense. It's almost like if someone came in my house to kill me, would he have a right to self-defense? So I just wanted to check, though, in terms of the international law, if that is indeed accurate.
I mean, I can take this, and Sana, if you want, please add. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, where I have no legal expertise. What I can say is, as someone who obviously like follows international law in order to understand and contextualize what is happening, law in general is interpretive. So let's just say that a lawyer will make an argument, and a different lawyer will make an entirely different argument. Judges will make different judgments. But there is just the basic rationality in the way that I think you yourself framed it was so important. It's like, well, if someone invades your house, breaks into your house, you have the right to defend yourself. We'd never talk about the right of the person who broke in to harm you. And so yes, that's the basic principle. And the way that you can see it, though, so without being a lawyer, without doing any of that, look at the language that's used to describe Ukraine and Ukrainians. Very clearly, they have the right to resist Russia as an occupier, right? This is the language that's used. We saw, I mean, this is incredible if you compare this for a moment. We saw mainstream media outlets showing how to make Molotov cocktails, Ukrainians using them as a means to resistance. You would never see anything. I mean, just the idea of resistance, the word resistance is not applied to Palestinians in any way. So there's the legal part of it, but you can see it manifest in the way that different scenarios are treated. So even if you took it out of just legal interpretations, it's who has the right to the self-defense.
Yeah, that's super.
The right to it. And if you're Ukrainian, you do, and if you're Palestinian, you don't.
That's great. Thank you. What a great response. Thank you. And thanks for the question, Marilyn. Samantha, you want to ask your question?
Hi, thank you so much for organizing this. It's awesome. One thing that I've noticed a lot, and this was in some of the headlines that we read, is that it seems to me that a lot of times these headlines are framed as like the IDF says blank, and I don't I could be wrong, but I just feel like I rarely see headlines that involve other things where the report is almost like they're reporting on what was said in a press release or something rather than what actually happened. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about like if that's to sort of cover their bases in case something is wrong. They can say, oh well, the same way they do with the police, like when George Floyd was murdered, like it was initially they took exactly what the police said and then it turned out the police had lied. Is the usage of direct from the mouth of the IOF the standard, or is it only in this particular situation that we see such deference to paid to
Excellent.
speakers?
Great
Thanks.
question.
I'd love to answer this question because it's one of my favorite ones. Thank you so much for asking it. So one of the things, it is actually a default, and I'll explain why. So one of the things that the U.S. news media does is that it's an institution, and like other institutions, they give deference to other institutions as well, right? So I love that you brought up the example of police, or like reporting on the police, reporting on crime. We find again, and especially there was slight changes in like criminal justice coverage in the last few years, especially since the 2020 uprising. But like generally speaking, right, we find that stories about, as you mentioned, any kind of anything involving the police always reference police unions, representative prosecutors, people who are really entrenched in the entire police infrastructure. And that's also by design by police unions themselves. And of course, that impacts language like, officer involved shootings, so on and so forth. Now, the other thing is, yes, the reporting that we see on Gaza absolutely takes Israeli officials, it basically takes press releases and presents them as reporting. And what we find is that this is not at all different from how the US news media will report on wars and operations that are done by the US military itself. The difference is that we tend to look at, I'm a Canadian, so, but we tend to look at our military in a bit more of a, what's the word I'm looking for, as a matter of fact, versus, of course, the fact this is a foreign military we're talking about, which is the IDF. But it makes sense when we consider that American institutions and the American government do consider Israel as an extension of its project in the world, as opposed to a completely foreign country. And so deference to the Israeli military, to Israeli officials, to having, a very famously, I remember early in the genocide, Abby Phillip of CNN was interviewing one of the spokespeople of the IOF, and he said to her, and he went on for a while about how there are no innocents in Gaza. He's like, we are against darkness and they are darkness. So whose side are you on? And there was absolutely no pushback, because again, there is this this relationship between Americans writ large and the American narrative and Israel itself. And again, it's like presented as this very sacrosanct relationship, which makes Israel an extension of the United States, which is why we see this deference and respect for Israeli institutions. Even when American journalists will critique Israel, they critique it in the context of we need to protect Israel, because it's like our American Israel.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Samantha. So we're going to try, I'm going to sneeze.
Bless you.
Thank you, Isam. We have about 10 minutes left, so let's see how many questions
I'll
we
be
can
quick.
get through.
I have a quick
Isam,
comment
go ahead.
and a question. First of all, if you probably touched base about it, is that the Palestinians are called prisoners and the Israelis are called hostages, which is really reflective of the bias in the media. But I just happened to be watching ABC on the day that the hostages were released, and their coverage was over 10 minutes on ABC about the Israeli, and they had personal contact. In other words, they showed and crying and hugging each other for 10 minutes. And I swear, I had it taped and only covered 20 seconds with the Palestinians coming in the big buses, and there was no personalization to the ones who have been prisoners. God knows how long. So the question really that comes to my mind is that how can we change the way that media does these things? How can we pressure them? How can we make the change to allow the true way of reporting rather than having this bias? I know it's a big question, but is there anything that we can give us help or let us know what to do?
I know we've been switching back and forth, but I feel like I'll give a little bit of my response, and then I think Sana would actually have something, especially because of her role as a journalist, will probably have something to contribute to this question. What I would say is there's a few things that we can do. One is with your pocketbooks, right? The idea of like right now there's a writer's boycott of the New York Times. So even if you're not consuming it, as someone who is contributing, I mean, for a lot of like writers and authors, you think, well, it's very prestigious to write for the New York Times, but there must be accountability somewhere. So joining boycotts, whether you're the writer or the consumer, not paying them, right? Not canceling your subscriptions, not having subscriptions. So ways in which we can leverage I mean, they all have corporate interests. They're all working on an economic incentive. So if we can leverage that power in the same way that we think about BDS in general, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, that kind of leverage exists for the consumer and the contributor. So there's that. The other thing that I think could be important that we don't have yet is a media watchdog, something, because there are the counterpoints to that. Like if you've heard of camera or honest reporting, those exist basically as Zionist organizations to pressure newsrooms to adopt certain language. So there has to be a counter watchdog that does that, not to influence it to be biased, but to just tell the truth. I mean, that's really all we're asking for, is for them to be honest rather than to create these narratives. So I'll leave it at that. And then I think, I mean, I could be wrong, but I assumed Sana would also have something maybe better to contribute than what I said.
So I actually really go back and forth on this question because I mean, I had a very unique experience as a journalist because I was working in a newsroom where the word Palestine was okay to say, right? Saying occupation, apartheid, Zionism was a normal thing that we discussed and we covered and whatnot. So, because again, I worked in the Al Jazeera newsroom, and there was never hesitation to talk about it in an honest way. But in terms of how much can we change? I mean, for me, it's like every time, especially when it comes to looking at the Palestinian hostages and how they've been portrayed, the violence that they've experienced, and how that's like the discussion and conversation around it is near non-existent. I mean, it really, as a journalist, but also obviously as a human being, just rips apart at my soul because you hear individual stories and each Palestinian story, each Palestinian who has endured torture and imprisonment by the Israelis. I mean, each one of those stories is enough to break, I think, any heart, to break any even mind, because it's just so devastating. But in terms of changing that language, I mean, Asal made really good points with regards to wallet, subscriptions, writing. One thing I will say is that despite what you may think, they absolutely do pay attention to the comments. Like every newsroom pays attention to the comments. They do read emails and especially letters to editors. They may not always respond, but the more that you do send in, the more annoyed they get. Right now, will that create significant changes in a newsroom? Not necessarily, because what we are up against is a structure that is imbalanced, and it's not towards us. It is a structure that is going to privilege a narrative that is pro-Israel, pro-American imperialism, pro-war as well. It is not going to be an anti-war narrative. So we are up against that, but that doesn't mean we just kind of throw our hands up. So my encouragement would be, as well, in addition to what was mentioned, is to like annoy the hell out of them in the comments and write the letters to the editors. And if there is a journalist who is doing good work, send them encouragement as well, because there's a good chance they're really struggling inside of their newsroom up against, like, again, that entire structure, which is pro-Israel, pro-war, etc.
Good, thank you. So Isam, I want everyone to know this. So we have organized a letter writing group among us, and with Isam, where did you go? Is he still there? Oh,
I
did
took
you
him
take
off. I took him
No?
off spotlight. I guess that wasn't your
I
intent.
wanted to stay there for a minute. We have a letter writing group within Mass Peace Action, and we alert one another when we see a story and we say, hey, this one needs a response. And so a bunch of us write letters. At the same time, a group of this, a subgroup, went to meet with the editors of the Boston Globe to complain or to educate them about the use and misuse of the word anti-Semitism, where criticism of Israel was being equated with anti-Semitism. So they went once to talk with them. They might have done it again because it didn't get solved. This continued. But at least it's something that we are doing. So there is a role for us to play. Okay. Cole, I want to check with you. It's 8:25. Cole, maybe two more questions. Can you tell me what you're thinking?
Sounds good.
And is it okay with Assal and Sana? Are you both good with two more? Okay, so Moji, are you there, Moji?
Yes, I am, and from Colorado, and I'm an Iranian American peace activist and human rights and democracy activist and a scholar of a previous generation of Iranian Americans than Dr. Assal Rad. I am proud of her. By the way, her first name means honey. I am being a social scientist, I keep try to find ways of creating counter narrative. So one of the narratives, of course, has been anti-Semitism being weaponized for genocide. And so I try to say what Israel is doing is anti-Semite. And for example, say that brainwashing 90% of the Israeli population, manipulating them, is wholesale anti-Semitism and wholesale human rights violation. So we need to try to, at the same time that we don't dehumanize Israelis, as horrible their manipulated opinions as may be, but if we could see them as victims of the Israeli state, of the Zionist, the Goliath mindset. So I thought to share these two counter narratives, and then the more we try to get to create easily understandable counter narratives, then we can hopefully change the mindset of the so-called the civilized global northers, who have bought into that they are the civilized and people like Assal and I are savages and Palestinians.
Thank you, Moji. Assal, do you want to respond? Are you good?
No, thank you. I appreciate the specific shout out. I guess it is important, broadly speaking, to counter the narratives, because that's the basis of the entire conversation. I think gets to Sana's point that it's not, we're focused right now on the media, but the media is one piece of a very large puzzle that creates broad narratives. And that happens through popular culture, through media culture, through political discourse, through education systems. Like, it's at every turn we're getting the same story over and over again, and there's this whole absence of another story. It's great to see, for instance, something like Watermelon Pictures, like films about Palestinians coming out. The Teacher that shows you about the occupation in the West Bank. I think it's Palestine 36 that now is showing history that's completely absent. So there's so many ways in which we have to address that narrative. And I think part of it is, if you're countering a narrative about the weaponization of anti-Semitism, how about we talk about the weaponization of Islam, anti-Muslim attitudes that constantly are informing the way that we think and create this kind of, why do you think they keep referring to things like, Sana mentioned this ISIS, like, because it rings a quick bell, right? You hear ISIS and all of a sudden, oh, ISIS bad. Iran backed, put that on anything. And there's such a strong narrative that Iran is the enemy of everyone, that also picks up on the same thing. So we have to start countering it by, looking at the reality of how are we treating, look at the campaign against Mamdani. Why was he attacked? He was attacked for being Muslim, period. So those are the parts I think that are important to address as well. Not just undermining their narratives, but the parts that are absent, bringing those, amplifying that.
Yeah, super. Thank you, Moji. Thank you for your question. One wishes that when we keep hearing the Iran backed, that we would hear in mainstream media US backed, right? Because we don't usually hear that. Okay, I think the last question, Jeffrey, do you have a question? And a question, not a long statement, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I do. I just got on the meeting, so sorry if it's not. Sorry if it's gonna be short. But who's in charge of media bias for starters?
What does that mean? Who is in charge?
Well, who did the media bias part? Because I missed that.
So you'll be able to get the recording on the YouTube channel, and you can watch. And we had two excellent presenters.
But I got a question involving media bias.
Go ahead.
You think my idea called Genocide can help not only protect journalists, but allow them to journal without being forced to break their own moral ethics? Genocide protects journalists and holds countries responsible in the case of them either getting beat up, arrested, or even killed, like what Trump's did. Like what Trump's defending that Saudi prince that ordered that journalist death.
Yeah. So this seems to be taking us off base a little bit. Assal or Sana, did you have a response to that? I'm not sure I'm not clear.
My idea, Genocide, help journalists.
Okay. So, I mean, there were about 240 journalists killed, Palestinian journalists killed in Gaza. And we need the mainstream media to be reporting that as well. So I think we're going to leave it at that. Jeffrey, thank you for your question.
Well, if the genocide law was in place, they
Yeah, I think that goes beyond what we want to discuss this evening. So thank you for your question. Julie, thank you for being available to us. And unfortunately, I mean, we just did the verbal questions. Folks, I'm sorry, I know you're waiting to ask questions, but we've gone past our hour and a half, and our wonderful speakers have been so kind to stay with us. Samantha's asking, are there ways for out-of-staters to join your letter writing efforts? Yes, I'm just going to put my email in the chat, Samantha, so you can contact me and we'll hook you in. We'll connect you to the letter writers. Thank you so much to Sana and Assal. Before you go, ladies, because I want you to see people thanking you. So to the audience, could you, in whatever way you can, show your appreciation by, applauding, get off of mute and tell them how much you appreciated their participation.
I'm so sorry, but I think Sana wanted to make one quick point, and so I'd be happy to hear it if it's okay.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Sana.
So I want to make actually two very quick points. One I already made in the chat, which was a book I really recommend to absolutely anyone who's interested in the question of narrative, and especially with regards to the relationship between Israel and the United States. It is the late Dr. Amy Kaplan's book, Our American Israel, and it actually I think it changed. I thought I knew everything that you had to know about that relationship, and then I read that book and I was like, wow, this is incredible. So the book is called Our American Israel by Dr. Amy Kaplan, and it traces the relationship between Israel and the United States since before also 1948, and then through also the global war on terror and the really critical role that Israel plays there. The second thing I wanted to say is that I just wanted to thank all of you for joining this. It's so easy to see everything that's going on day in and day out, with regards to the genocide in Gaza, to the destruction that we're also seeing in the West Bank, and what happens in this country, and the silence that also, unfortunately, sometimes feels very overwhelming. And it's very easy to fall into this sense of despair. And I think, you know, this kind of a workshop, these type of workshops, all of you showing up, it actually makes me very emotional, you know, to see that people are continuing to gather and learn and relearn and share with one another, because at the end of the day, we may not have the big structure of power in our favor, but the fact that what we do have is exactly this. And I feel very honored to be invited and share this space with like Assal and like all of you. So thank you. And I hope I can support in any way possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sana. So again, a huge thank you to Assal and Sana. So could you applaud them, come off mute and tell them thank you, type it in.
شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Presentation.
Thank you.
Great, wonderful job.